The way a culture views people as being inherently bad or inherently good is going to affect their view of what government does. And Thomas Sowell, as I mentioned before in his book Conflict of Vision, points this out in his introduction. And this is basically what separates liberalism from conservative thought. That liberalism can be traced back to and one thing that all liberals hold in common is a high view of man, that man is basically good, and conservatives recognize that man is basically evil. Now, if we think about these two categories, these two concepts of freedom and responsibility, the more the individual is responsible for his life, for his future, for his finances, for his planning, for his prosperity, the more that the responsibility ends up with the individual, the more freedom he is going to have. The more you take that responsibility away from him and shift it to someone else or something else, for example, government, then the less freedom he's going to have. So the degree of freedom then is going to be directly related to his freedom to succeed or fail. Now, if he can fail, but there aren't really any negative consequences, then the only reason you can put that cushion under him financially so that if he fails, the government's going to come along in the big nanny state and just pick him up and carry him along, is if it gets the resources to do that from somebody who has produced something. And that production comes from those who have worked and those who have succeeded. So those who are out there working are then going to have some of the things that they produce taken away from them and given to those who are non-producers in order to protect them in the midst of the failure. This is why freedom is directly related, the freedom to succeed is directly related to the freedom to fail. And when a government steps in to limit the consequences of failure, then it must also limit the positives of what an individual can enjoy through success. Thus, the freedom to succeed, which entails risk and reward, is directly proportionate to the freedom to fail. Now, when the government comes in and seeks to wipe out all these negatives, then it's going to borrow from the wealthy, from the achievers, from those who work, those who risk, those who labor, and it's going to give it to those who don't have anything. And this is called socialism today, although in earlier eras it wasn't necessarily called socialism, but we can think back to our study in Genesis a few years ago. In Genesis chapters about 45, 46, 47, when you have the famine in Egypt, they had Joseph had the dreams of the 7 good years and then the 7 lean years, and so he told the Pharaoh that for the 7 good years to store up percentage of the crops and resources every year so that they would have resources to survive the 7 bad years. And toward the end of the 7 bad years, they were running out of resources, and the people in Egypt were going hungry, and they were going to the Pharaoh to feed us and take care of us. And so the Pharaoh began to buy their land. And when it was all over with, the Pharaoh owned all the land in Egypt. He owned all the means of production. And at that point, all of the people become servants or slaves. And that's what happens under socialism and Marxism. When the means of production is owned by the government, then the people become slaves. That's why socialism is always a move towards less freedom and greater slavery of people to the government. But there's greater security because the government promises to take care of everything, which is why they call it the nanny state. Now, it's amazing today that a lot of people really don't understand what socialism is. And I don't know if that's just because they were never taught that as they were coming up through government-owned schools, because that's what they didn't want them to learn what socialism was so they could identify it. It must be so because we have a senator running for president right now, and he sat under a Marxist pastor for 20 years and couldn't identify what Marxism was. So we're going to have a president who can't identify Marxism, no different from people in the country who can't identify socialism. So I've had a couple of cartoons that illustrate the principle of socialism. Here's the first one. It's Halloween, so this has a certain timeliness to it. Kids come up to the house, and the man says, "Look how much candy you have. I'm going to take half and give it to the kids too lazy to go trick-or-treating for themselves." And one of the little kids says, "Oh, darn, a Democrat." So here you have these kids who are going out and they're working hard. They put on their costumes. They go from house to house and get all this candy. When it's over with, somebody wants to come along and say, "Okay, you can't have all that candy you went out and got. There's some kids here who just were too lazy to go out, and so we're going to give them half your candy." Now, how does that work? That doesn't work very well. That's a good illustration to use with children if you want to communicate to them what socialism is as opposed to free market economics. Now, there's another email that came across my desk today that I thought also illustrates this and does it well for those who are a little bit older. This is a notice to all employees. As of November 5th, 2008, when President Obama is officially elected into office, our company will instill a few new policies which are in keeping with his new inspiring issues of change and fairness. Number one, all salespeople will be pooling their sales and bonuses into a common pool that will be divided equally between all of you. This will serve to give those of you who are underachieving a fair shake. Number two, all low-level workers will be pooling their wages, including overtime, into a common pool, dividing it equally amongst yourselves. This will help those who are too busy for overtime to reap the rewards from those who have more spare time and can work extra hours. Third, all top management will now be referred to as the government. We will not participate in this pooling experience because the law doesn't apply to us. Fourth, the government will give eloquent speeches to all employees every week, encouraging its workers to continue to work hard for the good of all. Fifth, the employees will be thrilled with these new policies because it's good to spread the wealth. Those of you who have underachieved will finally get an opportunity. Those of you who have worked hard and had success will feel more patriotic. Sixth, the last few people who are hired should clean out their desks. Don't feel bad, though, because President Obama will give you free health care, free handouts, free oil for heating your home, free food stamps, and he'll let you stay in your home for as long as you want, even if you can't pay your mortgage. If you appeal directly to our Democratic Congress, you might even get a free flat-screen TV and a coupon for free haircuts. A little humor there. What's interesting is to recognize that what is happening today has been clearly seen to be precisely what is needed to be done to ruin and destroy the United States. Back in 1963, the goals of the Communist Party for destroying America were read into the congressional record, and they listed 45 different tactics that the Communist Party in America thought were necessary in order to wipe out and destroy the nation. Some of these are pertinent today. Number 25 was break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. Number 26, present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. This was in 1963. It's kind of helpful to look back, isn't it? 27th, to infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion, discredit the Bible, and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious crutch. Number 28, eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the ground that it violates the principle of separation of church and state. 29, discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. Now, I didn't want to take the time to play it tonight, but if you haven't heard it, I would encourage you to get with somebody who has a computer and listen to the interview that Senator Obama gave to a radio station in 2001, where he then in that interview, he clearly stated that his agenda, he believed that the basic flaw of the Warren Court, which was the radical court back in the 60s, and the basic flaw of the civil rights movement was that they didn't try to redistribute the wealth and to pass the wealth along. And he goes back and he says some extremely damaging things related to his view of the Constitution. He thinks the Constitution is basically flawed. Now, how a man who is running for the highest office in the land, who has to swear that he's going to preserve and defend the Constitution, can question the Constitution at its core is beyond me, but that's what happens as a result of postmodernism.